They didn't just challenge faith. They set fire to what many consider sacred. In the courtyard of a university, piles of Bibles burned while dozens of students laughed and recorded the scene, convinced nothing would happen. But something did happen. Something so powerful that it turned the place into heavy silence, where even the air seemed to stop and watch. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a real testimony of how the impossible can happen when God's love decides to show up. It's a story that will make you think about how far humans can go when they turn away from God, and how far God will go to bring them back. If you're here, it's because something inside you wants to see the impossible become real. Take a deep breath and stay with me, because in the next few minutes you're going to feel every detail of that night. And you might be more moved than you expect. This is the channel where miracles begin, where every word can be the start of a new life. So go ahead and subscribe, because this story doesn't end here. It might start right now inside of you. The university courtyard was packed that night. Laughter mixed with hurried footsteps and random conversations until something caught everyone's attention. A group of students forming a circle in the middle of the quad with a pile of books on the ground. These weren't just any books. They were Bibles. The atmosphere shifted when David Parker, known as one of the most outspoken and controversial sociology students, raised his voice and announced they were there to challenge what he called collective superstition. Beside him stood Laura, a psychology major, and other friends who shared the same skeptical views. Curious students gathered around, some just watching, others filming with their phones. The mood was defiant. David struck the first match and said loudly, "If this book is as powerful as they say, let's see if it can survive the fire." The match touched the paper, and the flames began to spread slowly, devouring the first cover. A strange mix of euphoria and tension filled the air. In the crowd was Julia Ross, a nursing student known for her calm and welcoming nature. Her faith was steady and simple, the kind of person who always had an encouraging word for anyone who needed it. When she saw what was happening, her heart raced. She took a deep breath and stepped forward until she was standing close to the circle. Her eyes shone with concern, but her voice was steady. "David, do you really think burning these books will change anything?" For a moment, the courtyard went silent. David smirked and said mockingly, "Oh, it'll change something. It'll show we're not afraid of imaginary gods." Some around him laughed, but Julia didn't flinch. She stared at the burning books and whispered a prayer so softly that only her lips moved. As the pages curled and burned, something began to unsettle the crowd. The light breeze that had been blowing suddenly grew stronger, scattering sparks and forcing some to back away. One ember nearly landed on a student filming up close. Laughter turned into startled shouts. Julia stood still, then closed her eyes and said out loud, "Lord, if you're real, show it here and now. Let nothing silence your word." Some students exchanged glances, surprised by her boldness. David tried to ignore her, but a shiver ran down his spine. He looked at the fire and noticed that despite the flames, some of the Bibles weren't fully burning, just scorched around the edges, as if refusing to be consumed. A murmur spread through the crowd. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the courtyard, nearly putting out the fire and sending papers flying. The atmosphere changed completely. This wasn't just a group of students playing with fire anymore. It felt like something unseen was there, watching. Julia dropped to her knees in the middle of the quad, and a few others joined her, softly singing a hymn. The sound echoed, filling the air with a strange calm. David's chest tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. A single sharp crack of thunder rolled in the distance, even though the sky was clear, and everyone instinctively looked up. In that moment, Michael, one of David's closest friends, fell to his knees, holding his head and whispering something. At first, no one could understand, but soon they realized he was repeating through tears, "He is holy. He is holy." The entire courtyard went silent. The laughter stopped. Phones were lowered. No one dared to move. Julia remained kneeling, tears streaming down her face, but her expression was one of peace, not fear. David's heart pounded, and for a few seconds he wanted to run away, but something held him in place. It felt as though an invisible weight had settled over the space. Even the stray dogs that roamed the campus stood still, watching. It was impossible to deny that something supernatural was happening. And this was only the beginning. David stared at Michael, who was still on the ground, repeating those words as if in a trance. His expression looked as though he was seeing something no one else could. Some friends tried to lift him, but his legs trembled uncontrollably. The silence was overwhelming. Julia slowly got up and walked over to Michael, kneeling beside him. She placed a hand on his shoulder and began to pray out loud. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a raw, heartfelt plea. Lord, if it's your will, touch every heart here tonight. Show them that your word is alive and no fire can destroy it. Her words seemed to cut through the air, reaching even those standing on the edges of the crowd. A chill ran through everyone present. Some of the students who had only come out of curiosity began stepping back, while others moved closer, as if drawn in. The flames that moments earlier had burned fiercely suddenly died down until only glowing embers remained. One Bible toppled to the side, almost completely untouched. A girl grabbed her phone and filmed it, whispering, "Look at this. It didn't burn." That video would later be shared online, but in that moment everyone stood frozen. David tried to come up with a sarcastic remark, but no words came out. The control he always felt he had over every situation was gone, completely gone. Then the impossible happened. A warm wind blew in the opposite direction, scattering the embers, but without burning anyone. It was as if every spark deliberately avoided touching those nearby, falling harmlessly to the ground and dying out. A boy sitting alone on a distant bench suddenly began to cry, though no one had spoken to him. Julia lifted her face and declared, "God is here." And in that instant, another thunderclap rolled through the sky, louder than the first. Many gasped, covering their mouths. A guy with glasses, one of the most vocal critics in every faith debate, fell back onto the ground and began to weep. "I don't know what's happening, but I feel something inside me," he said, thumping his chest. David didn't know whether to run or stay. His eyes filled with tears and he hated himself for it. Pride and fear fought a battle inside him. Julia stepped closer and looked him straight in the eyes. "David, you asked for a sign and God is answering you," she said. It was as if every word struck precisely where it needed to, dismantling the walls he had built over the years. He lowered his head, feeling the weight of it all. Michael, still kneeling, opened his eyes suddenly and looked at David with a calm expression. "He is holy," he repeated, but now his voice was steady, as though he had come back to himself. The courtyard, once a place of chaos and mockery, was now filled with reverence. Some students knelt on their own. Others began whispering prayers. Even those who had mocked stood silent, as if something kept them from laughing. David dropped to his knees, covering his face with his hands. This was no performance. It was as though something deep inside him had shattered. Julia knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone," she whispered. Tears streamed down his face, and this time he didn't try to hide them. "Now let me ask you something. Have you ever felt something so strong you couldn't explain it? Have you ever been somewhere where the air felt heavy, yet full of peace? If this story is stirring something inside you, write something simple in the comments like "I've felt it," so we can build a chain of faith and inspire others to think about it too. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Not because someone is asking you mechanically, but because you want to walk alongside stories like this. Stories that shake the soul and remind us that God still reveals himself. Click that subscribe button and turn on the bell, so you're here with us when we share what happened next. Because what came after was even more powerful. The courtyard was nearly silent, broken only by quiet sobs. The fire was almost out, leaving nothing but faint glowing embers that seemed to pulse like they were breathing. David was still on his knees, face buried in his hands, when something unexpected happened. A gentle breeze swept through the space. Not a random gust, but a breeze that seemed to move with purpose, circling around the group. Some students lifted their heads, sensing the difference, and Julia closed her eyes like someone who knew exactly what that presence meant. A strange peace spread, and suddenly the tension melted into something almost sacred. Michael took a deep breath and, still kneeling, spoke words no one expected to hear from him. "He's here. He hasn't abandoned us." His voice trembled, but every word came with conviction. David slowly raised his head and looked at his friend. What he saw disarmed him completely. This wasn't the same Michael who had mocked faith just minutes ago. His eyes seemed to shine, not in a mystical way, but with a depth and clarity David had never seen before. It was as if he was looking at someone who had just woken up after a long sleep. Julia stood with her hands raised, praying aloud, thanking God for his presence in that place. She knew this was a crucial moment. More students began kneeling. The atmosphere was so thick with emotion that some could barely hold back their tears. And then the unexpected happened. A metallic sound echoed from one of the lampposts. The light flickered twice and went out, followed by the others, one by one, until the courtyard was almost completely dark. Only the moon lit the scene, casting dramatic shadows. But instead of panic, what followed was a reverent hush. It was as if everyone knew something significant was about to happen. David felt pressure in his chest like a heavy weight sitting on him, and at the same time a soft, nearly inaudible voice spoke inside. "Why are you still resisting?" He tried to push the thought away, but the more he fought it, the louder it became. At that moment, Julia knelt again in the center of the circle and began to sing a simple song. Her voice rang so clearly it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The melody was soft, but carried authority. One by one, other voices joined hers until the entire courtyard became an improvised choir. Something inside David broke. Memories of his grandmother praying for him flooded his mind. He remembered mocking friends who went to church, remembered the pride that had fueled his rebellion. Each memory weighed heavier than the last. He couldn't take it anymore. With a deep, shaky breath, he collapsed face first on the ground, hands spread wide, and for the first time in years whispered a prayer. "God, if you're real, show me right now." The words had barely left his lips when a brilliant light filled the courtyard. It wasn't from the lamps or passing cars. It was as if a beam of light pierced the sky and focused right on the center of the circle. Students looked up, some shielding their eyes, others weeping even harder. Michael began laughing and crying at the same time, like someone finally set free from a long burden. Julia opened her eyes, tears running down her face, but she was smiling. David felt the weight crushing him lift, replaced by a peace so deep he couldn't hold back. He wept like a child. It wasn't shame. It was freedom. For several long minutes, no one spoke. The wind stopped entirely, and even the city noises seemed to fade away. It was as if time itself had paused to let this moment last forever. David sat back on the ground, breathing deeply like someone waking from a nightmare. Julia approached, placed her hand on his shoulder, and said gently, "You asked for a sign." And God answered. He looked at her, tears still streaming, and nodded as if finally understanding what he had been running from all these years. Some students began clapping softly, not mockingly, but reverently. It felt as though everyone had just witnessed something far greater than themselves. Meanwhile, some students who had been watching from a distance came closer, asking what had just happened. Julia explained quickly, her voice thick with emotion. David stood up slowly, still feeling his legs tremble. He looked at the pile of books on the ground, now reduced to ashes, and stepped closer. He picked up the Bible that hadn't burned and held it up, looking at his friends. "Maybe I've never really read this," he said quietly. "But if this book survived the fire, I think I can give what's written here a chance." For many, it was the first time they had ever seen David admit something like that. The transformation wasn't complete, but something had changed forever. The night that had begun as an act of rebellion ended in reverence. But what about the next day? The impact of that night would soon spread through the hallways, the classrooms, and the hearts of everyone who had been there. And this is the part you need to see, because this is where the story takes on a new meaning and shows that when God decides to act, no one walks away untouched. The next morning, the campus buzzed with whispers and questions about what had happened in the courtyard. Videos began circulating in group chats showing the fire dying out on its own, the moment Michael fell to his knees, and Julia's prayer. Those who hadn't been there were intrigued, wondering if it was real or some kind of setup. David woke up early, his heart still pounding. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, replaying every detail of the night before. The weight he had carried seemed to have been lifted, but at the same time a new feeling stirred inside him. Not emptiness, but a need to understand what had just happened. He grabbed the Bible that had survived the fire, its edges still scorched, and stared at it like something precious. He flipped through the pages without knowing where to start until his eyes landed on a verse. "You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart." It felt as if those words had been written just for him. On campus, the reaction was mixed. Some mocked, saying it was just coincidence or mass hysteria. Others, though, were deeply moved. Students who had never spoken about faith before started asking questions about God, prayer, and what that night had meant. Julia was approached by several classmates who wanted to talk, share their own stories, and even ask her to pray with them. A group of students suggested holding an open meeting in the courtyard to share what they had experienced. The atmosphere, once full of provocation, now seemed charged with anticipation. David stayed quiet that day, lost in thought. He remembered every debate, every word he'd used to ridicule the faith of others. For the first time, he felt shame, not because anyone had humiliated him, but because something inside him knew he had been wrong. That afternoon, he decided to go find Julia. He saw her sitting under a tree, reading. When he approached, she smiled as though she'd been expecting him. "I don't know what happened to me last night," he said, "but I know I'm not the same." Julia closed the book and answered softly, "This is just the beginning, David. When God touches us, we can't stay the same." That sentence echoed inside him. In the following days, the movement grew stronger. More students began gathering to pray in the courtyard. Michael, once one of the loudest mockers, now spoke to other students about what he had felt, saying he couldn't explain it but knew it was real. Even some professors began to talk about it. A literature professor who had been there that night told her students she had never seen a group of young people so deeply impacted by something spiritual. The story reached the university administration, which decided not to punish the group for the fire, recognizing that everything had ended peacefully. Meanwhile, David felt a daily transformation. He began stepping away from habits that once seemed normal. The parties he used to love no longer felt the same. The urge to mock faith was gone, replaced by a childlike curiosity to learn about what he had once despised. Each night when he returned to his room, he opened the Bible and read a few verses. Sometimes he cried alone, not fully understanding why, but he felt a peace he had never known before. The impact spread beyond the campus. People from outside began showing up at the prayer gatherings, drawn by the stories circulating online. Some parents even approached students to thank them, saying their children seemed calmer, more respectful, even more dedicated to their studies. It was as though a new wind was blowing through the whole academic community. Julia, watching all of this, silently thanked God for the courage to kneel that night. But the deepest change was still happening inside David. He knew feeling emotional wasn't enough. He had to make a choice. He spent days wrestling with himself, torn between surrendering fully and fearing rejection from the friends who still mocked everything. One rainy afternoon, as he walked across the courtyard, he saw the prayer circle once again. The singing mixed with the sound of the rain. He stopped, hesitated, then sat down on the ground with them. For the first time, he prayed out loud, asking forgiveness for the way he had scorned the faith of so many. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the rain, and he felt something like an invisible embrace, a certainty that he was no longer alone. That night, the courtyard was fuller than ever, not just with students, but with people who had heard about what had happened in the past few days. David arrived early, holding the scorched Bible that had become a symbol for him. When he saw Julia and the others gathered, he took a deep breath and stepped into the circle without hesitation. The light drizzle seemed to wash the ground, and everyone's hearts. When the silence settled, David stood and spoke, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I was here that night. I was one of the ones who started all of this. For me, burning those books was just a way to prove no one could tell me what to believe. But God didn't answer me with anger. He answered me with something I can't explain. Since that day, everything in me has changed. I no longer take pleasure in mocking faith. In fact, I want to know this God who stood against my challenge." David's words echoed through the courtyard, and many began to cry. Michael, overwhelmed, stood and said, "I was lost too, and God found me that night. He showed me that even when I mocked him, he still loved me." The atmosphere turned to pure reverence. Julia then suggested that everyone join in prayer. Right there, In the middle of the university courtyard, dozens of students held hands and began to pray together, some for the very first time in their lives. The sound of their voices mixed with the rain, creating a unique melody. People walking by stopped to watch, some just observing, others joining in. It was impossible not to be moved. David knelt down and this time, with no fear of seeming weak, prayed aloud, "God, I know I don't deserve it, but I need you. Forgive my mistakes, change my life, and help me live a new way." When he finished, he took a deep breath and felt an indescribable relief. This wasn't just an emotional moment. It was as if the weight of years had been lifted off his shoulders. Julia stepped close, placed her hand on his shoulder, and smiled. "Welcome home." That simple gesture brought tears to the eyes of many who were watching. In the following days, what began as a small gathering turned into something much bigger. Professors began to show up, some just to listen, others to share their own stories. A history professor known for his skepticism confessed that he had never witnessed something so powerful and that he was rethinking many of his own beliefs. The cafeteria became a meeting place for conversations about spirituality. What had once been the subject of jokes became a source of inspiration. The movement grew so much that the students organized a special night of worship in the courtyard. There was music, testimonies, and an atmosphere of hope that even touched those who had resisted the most. David told his story again, this time with a light in his eyes, and without any shame in admitting that he now followed the faith he once mocked. He hadn't become perfect overnight, but his change was undeniable, and it inspired others to seek something greater. And now, I want to speak directly to you watching this story. Maybe you see yourself in David. Maybe you once mocked what now makes sense. Maybe you're like Julia, trying to be a light in the middle of so many challenges. Or maybe you're like Michael, someone who was touched in a way you still can't explain. I want to invite you to write in the comments what this story stirred in you. It can be a word, a sentence, or even your own testimony. When you share, you help others who will read it, people who might be going through exactly what you went through. If you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you somehow. So be part of this community of faith and hope. Subscribe to the channel now, not as just a click, but as a step toward continuing this journey of transformation with us. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next video, because every story here is an invitation to start again. And before you go, I want to pray for you. Lord, I pray for every person who watched this story. May they feel your presence right now. May they find peace for their battles and strength to keep going. May hearts be healed, families restored, and your love become real to each of them. In Jesus' name, amen. Now it's your turn. Write in the comments how this story touched your life and what you learned from it. Let's fill this space with hope and show the world that faith, love, and compassion are still alive. Because the miracle doesn't end here. It can begin in you today.